Welcome, my dear listener. Tonight, I shall tell you of an age when the world was young and the stars were closer to men's hearts. I have walked through countless centuries, witnessed empires rise from dust and crumble back into memory. But of all the tales that echo through the corridors of time, none shine with such enduring brilliance as those born beneath the olive groves and marble columns of ancient Greece. These are not merely stories, my friend. They are the dreams of a civilization that sought to understand the very fabric of existence itself. Tonight, as the evening settles around us like a familiar cloak, I shall share with you the tales that have shaped the soul of the Western world. Stories of gods who loved and raged with the passion of mortals, of heroes who dared to challenge fate itself, and of lessons whispered across millennia that still ring true in our modern hearts. Pour yourself something warm, settle into comfort, and let us journey together to a time when Mount Olympus touched the heavens, and every shadow held the possibility of divine encounter. Chapter 1. When Chaos Birthed the World in the Beginning. Ah, how many tales begin with those words, yet none quite like this. There was chaos, not the disorder we speak of today. No, this was something far more profound. Picture, if you will, an infinite void, a yawning emptiness that stretched beyond comprehension. No light, no darkness, no up nor down, simply ... potential, pure, untamed, waiting. I remember, or perhaps I have been told so many times, it feels like memory, the sensation of that first stirring. From this formless void, something remarkable occurred. The earth herself was born. Gaia, they called her, and she was beautiful beyond mortal understanding. She was not merely ground beneath feet or soil for planting. She was mother, provider, the very foundation upon which all life would dance its brief, brilliant dance. Gaia, in her solitude, brought forth Uranus, the sky. Imagine the poetry of it. Earth reaching upward, creating heaven itself. And Uranus looked upon Gaia with wonder, and they became one. From their union sprang the first children of creation, beings of such power that the very mountains trembled at their birth. The Titans, 12 in number, 6 sons and 6 daughters, each embodying forces that would shape the cosmos. Among them was Cronus, youngest of the males, whose name would echo through the ages with both reverence and dread. There was Oceanus, whose waters would circle the world, and Hyperion, who would father the sun itself. The sisters, to Rhea Themis, Mnemosyne, each carrying within them the seeds of divine purpose. But Uranus, looking upon his offspring, felt something unexpected stirring in his immortal heart. Fear. These children, so powerful, so vital, with cosmic energy. What if they should one day challenge his supremacy? What if, in their strength, they sought to cast him down as he had risen up? And so, driven by this terrible fear, Uranus made a choice that would echo through the ages as one of history's first great betrayals. He took his children, his own flesh, born of his union with beloved Gaia, and thrust them deep into the earth's belly, into Tartarus. That dark place, that prison beneath the roots of the world, became their cage. Can you imagine Gaia's anguish? To feel her children beating against her inner walls, crying out in their imprisonment. The pain was unbearable. The earth herself groaned with the weight of it, and in her suffering something changed. Love curdled into rage. Devotion transformed into determination for justice. She came to her imprisoned children and spoke words that would reshape the cosmos. Who among you will free yourselves? who has the courage to face your father and break these chains? Silence answered her. The Titans, for all their power, feared Uranus. All save one. Cronus stepped forward. Perhaps ambition drove him, or perhaps he simply could not bear his mother's pain any longer. I will do it, he said, and his voice carried the weight of destiny. Give me the means, and I shall end his tyranny. Gaia, with hands that had shaped mountains, crafted a weapon, a sickle of adamant, harder than any earthly metal, sharp enough to cut the very fabric of reality. She placed it in Cronus's hands, and he felt its weight, its terrible purpose. Night fell, that first night that would change everything. Uranus descended from the heavens to embrace his wife, unaware that beneath him his youngest son waited with that gleaming blade. The moment came. Cronus struck. The cry that tore from Uranus's throat was heard across all creation. It was pain, yes, but more than that, it was shock, betrayal, the agony of a father wounded by his own blood. The sky bled, and his blood fell into the sea, and from that divine essence, new beings began to form. The Furies emerged, spirits of vengeance, who would forever after punish crimes of family betrayal. And Aphrodite herself was born from the sea foam, mixed with that celestial blood, beauty emerging from violence, love from pain. Uranus, defeated and maimed, retreated to the farthest reaches of the sky. But before he departed, he turned his fading gaze upon Cronus and spoke a curse, or was it a prophecy? As you have done to me, so shall be done to you. A sun shall rise, and you shall fall. Cronus heard these words, and felt their truth settle into his bones like winter frost. He had won his freedom, freed his siblings, and claimed the throne of the cosmos. But the seed of fear had been planted, and it would grow into something monstrous. The Titans now ruled the world in what we might call the Golden Age, a time before humans walked the earth, when only gods and their children moved through creation. Cronus took his sister Rhea as his queen, and their reign seemed, for a time, peaceful, prosperous even. But that curse, ... Those words his father had spoken, they haunted Cronus. He could not forget them. He would not forget them. And when Rhea announced she was with child, joy should have filled his heart. Instead, only dread answered. Chapter 2. The Devouring Father and the Hidden Son, the Palace of Cronus. Though I never saw it with these eyes, must have been magnificent. Golden walls that caught the light of ages, halls that echoed with the footsteps of gods. But within those splendid walls, a terrible secret festered like a wound that would not heal. Rhea's first child came into the world on a day when the sky seemed brighter than usual, as if celebrating new life. The baby girl was perfect, Hestia, they named her, and even as an infant, there was something gentle about her, something that spoke of hearth and home and warmth. Rhea held her daughter close, breathing in that sweet scent that all newborns carry, divine or mortal. But her moment of maternal bliss was short-lived. Cronus entered the chamber, and Rhea saw something in his eyes that chilled her divine blood. Madness. No, not quite. Something worse. Cold, calculated fear, masquerading as necessity. Give her to me, he commanded. My lord, she is your daughter. Give her to me. What happened next defies the natural order of things, challenges everything we understand about love and protection and the bonds between parent and child. Cronus took his daughter from Rhea's arms, and he swallowed her whole. Not dead, but imprisoned within her father's belly, trapped in darkness, alive but entombed. Rhea's scream, they say, was heard across all the earth. But what could she do? Cronus was lord of all creation, and he believed himself justified. Better this, he reasoned, than face his father's curse. Better to imprison his children than be overthrown by them. One by one they came. Demeter, with her potential to nurture all growing things. Hera, who would have been queen of queens. Hades, dark and stern, but just Poseidon, wild as the sea itself. Each birth brought Rhea a moment of hope, then an eternity of despair, as Cronus devoured each child in turn. 5 children, 5 times that terrible moment. 5 times Rhea felt her heart break anew. But with the 6th pregnancy, something changed. Perhaps it was desperation, or perhaps Gaia whispered ancient wisdom to her suffering daughter. Rhea knew she could not endure this again. She would not surrender another child to the darkness of her husband's fear. She fled, in secret, under cover of night. She traveled to Crete, to a hidden cave on Mount Ida. The place was ancient, even then, sacred, protected by powers older than the Titans themselves. And there, surrounded by nymphs who sang to mask the sound, Rhea gave birth to her last child, Zeus, even as an infant. There was something different about him. His eyes seemed to hold lightning. His cry was like thunder rolling across distant mountains. The fates themselves must have paused their eternal weaving to mark his arrival. For here was the child who would reshape the cosmos. But Rhea still had to face her husband. She wrapped a large stone in swaddling clothes, holding it as she had held each of her lost children. When she returned to the palace, Cronus was waiting, hand extended, expectant. "Another?" he asked, and there might have been sadness in his voice. Or perhaps that is merely what I wish to believe, that some part of him mourned what he felt he must do. Rhea handed him the bundle. Cronus barely glanced at it before swallowing it whole, stone and all. And Rhea wept, but these were tears of triumph disguised as grief. Somewhere far away, in that hidden cave, her true child drew his first breaths of freedom. The years passed, and Zeus grew strong on the milk of the goat Amalthea. The nymphs raised him, and the Curetes' warrior dancers beat their shields and drums to hide his presence whenever he cried or laughed too loudly. He learned the ways of the world from an eagle who became his companion, bringing him news from across creation. He grew tall and powerful, his muscles hardening with each passing season, his mind sharpening like a blade. And always, always, the knowledge of his imprisoned siblings burned in his heart like a sacred flame. When Zeus reached manhood, and what a sight he must have been, standing at the mouth of that cave, lightning playing between his fingers, a visitor came. Medusa, a titaness of great wisdom, approached him with a gift and a plan. In her hands, she carried a potion, carefully crafted, potent beyond measure. "Your father has grown complacent," she told him. "He believes himself invincible. Use this, and you shall free your brothers and sisters. But be warned, when you face him, you face the Lord of all creation." Zeus took the potion, and in his eyes burned something that had not existed before in all the cosmos: righteous purpose. He was not acting from fear or ambition alone. He was acting for justice, for family, for the future itself, disguised as a simple cupbearer. Oh, the poetry of it! Zeus infiltrated his father's palace, the great Cronus, secure in his power, suspicious of armies, but not of servants, accepted the cup without question. The liquid was sweet on his tongue, or so the tales tell. Perhaps he even smiled. But then it began. The pain, the convulsion, the terrible, inevitable reversal of what should never have been done. Cronus doubled over, and from his mouth came first the stone that Rhea had given him all those years ago. And then, one by one, his children. Hestia emerged first, exactly as she had been when swallowed. Time moves strangely in the belly of a god. Then Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. Each was now fully grown. Each had spent their imprisonment nursing rage and dreams of freedom. And each recognized their rescuer immediately. 6 siblings stood together for the first time in their existence, and the eldest, Zeus, raised his hand toward Olympus, that mountain whose peak touched the stars, and spoke words that would echo through eternity. There we shall make our home. There we shall build a new order. And there we shall prove that rule by justice is greater than rule by fear. But Cronus was not finished. Wounded, yes. Shaken, certainly. But he was still Lord of the Titans, and he would not surrender his throne without a battle that would shake the very foundations of the world. Chapter 3. The War that Shaped Eternity. Have you ever stood in a place where great events once unfolded, where you could almost hear the echoes of ancient voices, feel the weight of momentous decisions pressing down through the centuries? The plains of Thessaly are such a place. I have walked them in my long years, and even now, millennia after that terrible war, the ground seems to remember. The Titanomachi, the War of the Titans. For 10 long years, the cosmos itself became a battlefield, and the outcome would determine not just who ruled, but what kind of universe we would inhabit. Cronus, gathering his strength, called forth his brothers and sisters. Atlas, mighty beyond measure, became his general. Hyperion brought his command of light itself. The Titanesses, though some remained neutral, added their power to the cause. They were experience incarnate beings who had existed since near the beginning of all things. How could young upstarts, children barely free from their father's belly, hope to stand against them? Zeus and his siblings claimed Mount Olympus as their fortress. From its peak, they could see the Titan forces gathering below, an army that seemed to blot out the horizon. I almost remember the feeling in that moment. The weight of impossible odds. The understanding that this battle would decide everything. The first clash was like nothing the world had witnessed before. Titans hurling entire mountains. Gods calling forth earthquakes and storms. The sky itself seemed to split with the violence of it. Day and night lost meaning as the battle raged on, sometimes in perpetual twilight, sometimes in blinding flashes of divine power. But the Olympians were losing. For all their passion, for all their righteous cause, they were outmatched. The Titans had fought primordial monsters at the dawn of creation. They had reshaped continents. They wielded power born from the earth itself. Zeus, watching his forces pushed back again and again, made a choice that would alter the course of the war. He descended into Tartarus, yes, that same prison where the Titans had once been held. And there, in the deepest darkness, he found the Cyclopes. These one-eyed giants had been imprisoned by Uranus, then kept there by Cronus, abandoned and forgotten. They were master craftsmen, beings who could forge wonders from raw divine energy. Zeus freed them, and in gratitude, they gave gifts that would become legendary. For Zeus, they crafted the lightning bolt, not merely a weapon, but an extension of his very will, capable of striking with the force of cosmic judgment. For Poseidon, they created the trident, which could command not just water, but the very foundations of the earth, causing earthquakes with a single thrust. For Hades, they forged the helm of darkness, which granted invisibility and struck terror into the hearts of all who sensed its presence. Armed anew, the Olympians returned to battle. But Zeus went further. He descended once more into Tartarus and freed the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones. These were beings so terrible that both Uranus and Cronus had feared them. Each possessed 100 arms and 50 heads, and their strength was almost unimaginable. The tide of war turned. Picture it, Hades, invisible in his helm, striking from nowhere and everywhere. Poseidon, driving his trident into the ground and sending entire Titan battalions tumbling into newly formed chasms. The Hecatonchires, each hand hurling boulders, creating storms of stone that darkened the sky. And Zeus, standing at the peak of Olympus, lightning blazing from his hands like the wrath of destiny itself. The final confrontation came on a day when the world seemed to hold its breath. Cronus and Zeus faced each other, father and son, old order and new. I wonder, sometimes, what passed between them in that moment before the end. Did Cronus see his own father's face in Zeus? Did Zeus feel any pity for the being who had sired him, even if he had never known his fatherly love? Zeus raised his hand. The lightning bolt blazed forth. The impact, when it struck Cronus, was like the birth of a new star. The sound of it rolled across all creation, and every living thing paused, knowing that something fundamental had just changed forever. Cronus fell. The Titans, seeing their lord defeated, threw down their weapons. The war was over. But Zeus did not kill his father. Perhaps he remembered Uranus's curse, violence begetting violence, one generation always overthrowing the last. Instead, he showed mercy, or perhaps wisdom. The defeated Titans were cast into Tartarus, there to remain under the watchful eyes of the Hecatonchires who had helped secure victory. But they lived. They endured. Atlas, however, received special punishment for leading the Titan forces. Zeus condemned him to bear the weight of the heavens upon his shoulders for all eternity. I have wondered in my long years if this was crueler than simple imprisonment. To stand forever, muscles burning with eternal strain, holding up the very sky, neither fully imprisoned nor truly free. A punishment that serves a purpose, for the heavens must be held aloft, yet a punishment nonetheless. With the war ended, Zeus stood upon Olympus and looked out over a world transformed by conflict. The old order had fallen. A new age had begun. He and his siblings divided the cosmos among themselves. Zeus would rule the sky and reign as king of the gods. Poseidon would command the seas. Hades would govern the underworld, that mysterious realm of the dead. The goddesses, Hera, Hestia, Demeter, took their places in this new pantheon, each with dominion and purpose. But victory, Zeus would learn, is only the beginning of rule. Defeating your predecessor is one thing. Governing wisely, justly, eternally, that is something else entirely. And the gods of Olympus, for all their power, carried within them the same passions, fears, and flaws that would one day characterize the mortals they would create. The age of the Olympians had begun, and with it all the triumphs and tragedies that would inspire poets for thousands of years to come. Chapter 4. Wisdom born from the mind of God. There are births that change the world, and then there are births that seem to defy the very nature of existence itself. Athena's arrival belongs to the latter category, and even I, who have witnessed countless wonders, find myself in awe when I recount this tale. Zeus, newly victorious, ruler of the cosmos, stood at the peak of his power. But power, as he would learn repeatedly, brings its own complications. He fell in love, if we can call it that, with Metis, the tightness of wisdom and cunning thought. She was his first wife, before Hera, before any of the complications that would later define his reign. Metis was remarkable. Her mind could navigate any problem, untangle any puzzle. She could foresee consequences and possibilities that other beings, even gods, could not imagine. Zeus was drawn to her not merely for her beauty, but for that brilliant, shining intellect that seemed to illuminate any darkness. But Gaia and Uranus, ancient beings, primordial forces, who had set all this in motion, came to Zeus with a prophecy. Their voices were heavy with knowledge that spanned from before the beginning to beyond the end. Metis will bear you 2 children. The first will be a daughter, equal to you in strength and wisdom. But the second will be a son, and he shall overthrow you and become lord of the cosmos. Zeus felt his blood run cold. Here it was again, that curse, that cycle. His grandfather Uranus, dethroned by Cronus. Cronus himself, overthrown by Zeus, and now Zeus, warned that his own son would cast him down. The pattern seemed inescapable, written into the very fabric of divine existence. But Zeus had learned from his father's mistakes. He would not devour his children in mindless fear. No, his solution was more elegant, more terrible in its cleverness. If the mother could not give birth, there could be no son to threaten him. He approached Metis with false tenderness. "My love," he said, "show me your power of transformation. Let me see you become the smallest thing imaginable." Flattered, perhaps, or simply trusting, Metis obliged. She transformed herself into a droplet of water, small enough to rest upon a fingertip, and Zeus swallowed her. The tightness of wisdom became part of Zeus himself. Her knowledge, her cunning, her ability to see all sides of every situation, all of it absorbed into the mind of the king of the gods. It was, in its way, the most intimate form of consumption, not destruction, but incorporation. Metis lived on within Zeus, her thoughts becoming his thoughts, her wisdom guiding his decisions. Time passed. Zeus ruled, made judgments, commanded the weather and the fates of mortals and immortals alike. But something was changing within him. Headaches began, small at first, then growing. Soon they were unbearable, splitting his skull with divine agony. He roared in pain, and all of Olympus trembled. The gods gathered, alarmed. Never had they seen their mighty father brought so low by mere pain. Hephaestus, the smith god, master of forge and fire, was summoned. In his hands he carried an axe, and when Zeus commanded it, he raised it high and brought it down upon the king's skull. What emerged from Zeus's head was not blood, not fragments of broken divinity. It was a goddess, fully formed, fully armed, and fully grown. She wore armor that gleamed like captured moonlight. In her hand she held a spear. Upon her head rested a helmet that seemed woven from wisdom itself. She was Athena, and from her very first moment she was perfection embodied. The gods stepped back in awe. Here was something unprecedented, a being born not from union, not from the natural order of conception and gestation, but from pure thought made manifest, wisdom given form, strategic understanding transformed into living divinity. Zeus looked upon his daughter and felt something he had not expected, pride untainted by fear. Yes, she equaled him in strength and wisdom, just as the prophecy had foretold. But there would be no sun to threaten him. The cycle was broken, or so he believed, and Athena, looking upon her father, felt no desire for his throne. She was complete in herself, needing nothing but the opportunity to exercise her gifts. She became, in time, the goddess of wisdom, of strategic warfare, of crafts and civilization itself. Where Ares represented the brutal chaos of battle, Athena embodied warfare's intellectual side: tactics, strategy, defense. Where other gods acted on impulse, she thought first, planned carefully, acted decisively. Heroes would come to love her. Perseus, Odysseus, Heracles, all would benefit from her guidance. She was the goddess who rewarded cleverness, who valued intelligence over brute force, who understood that sometimes the greatest victories are won without ever drawing a sword. But I have always wondered about Medusa, still alive within Zeus, still thinking her thoughts that became his thoughts. Did she know her daughter existed? Did she feel pride? Did she dream, in that strange, eternal darkness, of the child who had inherited her brilliance, but escaped the fate of becoming a threatening son? The birth of Athena stands as one of mythology's great paradoxes. Born from a father who consumed his own wife to prevent prophecy, she emerged as the embodiment of wisdom itself. Born from violence and fear, she became the champion of just causes and reasoned thought. Born from Zeus's head, she never knew a mother's embrace, yet became the protector of cities and the patron of countless heroes. In Athens, that city that would bear her name after she defeated Poseidon in a contest for its patronage, the people would build her the Parthenon, a temple so magnificent that even now, thousands of years later, its ruins inspire awe. They understood something profound, that wisdom, strategy, and civilized thought are worth celebrating, worth honoring, worth building monuments to preserve. Athena never married, never bore children. She remained eternal as she was born, complete, independent, owing her existence to no one but herself and the strange circumstances of her arrival. In this way, she broke yet another divine pattern, proving that the gods, for all their power, could still surprise themselves with new ways of being. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind whispers through Athens' ancient streets, I imagine I can hear her voice, clear and certain, reminding us that wisdom is its own reward, that thought can triumph over force, and that sometimes the greatest power lies not in domination, but in understanding. Chapter 5: The Stolen Seasons and the Mother's Grief of All the Tales I Carry With Me Through the Turning of Ages. Few touch my heart as deeply as this one, for it speaks to something universal, something that transcends the divide between mortal and divine, a mother's love for her child, and what she will endure when that child is taken from her. Demeter was the goddess of the harvest, of growing things, of the cycles that sustained life itself. Her hands could coax wheat from barren soil, could turn the earth into a garden of abundance. But her greatest treasure was not grain or fruit. It was her daughter, Persephone. Oh, what a child she was! In those days, they called her Kori, simply the maiden, and she embodied spring itself. When she laughed, flowers bloomed. When she walked, grass grew greener in her footsteps. She was innocence and joy personified, and Demeter guarded her fiercely, knowing that the world of the gods could be dangerous for one so pure and beloved. They spent their days together in meadows that seemed touched by eternal spring. Demeter would watch her daughter dance among the wildflowers, would hear her voice raised in song. would feel that particular contentment that only comes from seeing one's child happy and safe. If she could have frozen time in those moments, I believe she would have. But time, even for gods, moves inexorably forward. Beneath the earth, in his vast realm of shadow and silence, Hades reigned over the dead. He was not cruel. No, cruelty is a misunderstanding of his nature. He was stern, yes, and somber, but just. He maintained the order of death as surely as his brothers maintained the order of sky and sea. But his kingdom, for all its necessity, was lonely. The dead made poor companions. They were memories, shadows, echoes of what they had been in life. Hades emerged one day into the upper world, as he occasionally did, to ensure that his realm's boundaries remained secure. And there, in a meadow so alive with color and light that it hurt his eyes accustomed to darkness, he saw her. Persephone was gathering flowers, narcissus, perhaps, or hyacinth. Her hair caught the sunlight like captured gold. Her laughter rang out like music. And Hades, who had existed for eons without feeling the stirring of desire, felt something awaken in his cold heart. It was not love, not yet, but it was want, need, a desperate longing to bring some of that light, that life, into his dark domain. He convinced himself, perhaps, that it was practical, a queen for his kingdom, companionship in the endless night. He did not stop to consider, or perhaps did not care, what she might want. The earth yawned open like a mouth. One moment, Persephone was reaching for a particularly beautiful bloom. The next, she was falling, the world of light disappearing above her, replaced by darkness and the sound of her own terrified screams. Hades caught her, placed her in his chariot, descended into his realm with the struggling goddess in his grasp. The earth closed above them, and it was done. Demeter felt it. A mother always knows the exact moment when something precious is torn away. She stopped mid-task, a terrible cold spreading through her divine heart. She called her daughter's name. No answer came. She ran to the meadow, found only crushed flowers and a deep crack in the earth that was already closing. What followed was a grief so profound that it changed the very nature of the world. Demeter wandered, searching. She asked the rivers if they had seen her daughter. She questioned the mountains, the forests, the very winds. She transformed herself into an old woman and walked among mortals, hoping for any whisper of information. 9 days and 9 nights she searched without rest, without food, without hope, dimming though her heart was breaking. On the 10th day, Hecate, goddess of crossroads and magic, came to her with grim news. "I heard her screams," Hecate said softly, "but I did not see who took her." Together they went to Helios, the all-seeing sun, who witnesses everything that occurs beneath his burning gaze. Helios spoke the truth, though it brought no comfort. Hades has taken her to be his queen. Zeus himself gave permission for the match. Zeus, her own brother, had arranged her daughter's abduction, had given Persephone away like property to be distributed among the gods. Demeter's grief curdled into rage, but more than that, into determination. If the world would not return her daughter willingly, then the world would suffer until it did. She abandoned her duties. The goddess of the harvest withdrew her blessing from the earth. Crops withered in the fields. Trees bore no fruit. Seeds planted in hope refused to sprout. Animals grew thin, finding nothing to eat. Mortals began to starve, and their prayers to the gods went unanswered. For what could the gods do when the very source of growth itself had turned her face away? Meanwhile, In the underworld, Persephone sat on a throne she had never asked for, beside a god she had never chosen. Hades, to his credit, treated her with respect. He did not force himself upon her. He gave her dominion over his realm, made her truly a queen. He brought her gifts, jewels carved from precious stones, found in the earth's deepest places, crowns wrought from metals that had never seen sunlight. But she would not eat, day after day, in that timeless place. She refused every offering, knowing that to consume food of the underworld was to bind oneself to it forever. She was a prisoner in a palace, and all the riches in the world could not compensate for the sun on her face, her mother's embrace, the simple joy of flowers blooming beneath her feet. Above, the world was dying. Even Zeus, from his throne on Olympus, could see it. The balance was breaking. If something did not change, mortals would perish entirely, and without mortals to worship them, offer them sacrifices, honor their names, what would the gods themselves become? Zeus sent Hermes, the messenger god, down into the darkness with a command: Persephone must be returned to her mother. Hades received the message with a heavy heart. He had grown to care for this bright spirit in his dark realm, even if she would never return his affections. But he was a god of order, and Zeus's word was law. "You may return to your mother," he told Persephone, and her face lit up with hope, so brilliant it could have illuminated his entire kingdom. But then Hades, ever careful, ever thinking, asked, "Have you eaten anything during your time here?" Persephone hesitated. In her joy at the prospect of freedom, she had forgotten. Just that morning, overwhelmed by hunger after so many days of fasting, she had accepted a pomegranate. She had eaten exactly 6 seeds, no more. The sweet tart juice had burst on her tongue, and she had savored that small pleasure. 6 seeds, such a small thing, such a monumental consequence. "Then you are bound to this realm," Hades said, and there might have been satisfaction in his voice, or perhaps resignation. One who eats the food of the dead cannot fully return to the living, but compromise, that most useful of all divine tools, emerged from this impasse. Hermes, ever clever, suggested a solution. Zeus decreed it so. Persephone would spend a portion of each year in the underworld, 1 month for each seed she had consumed, 6 months with Hades in the darkness, 6 months with Demeter in the light. Mother and daughter, reunited in that first return, and oh, what a reunion it must have been. Demeter held her child as if she would never let go, weeping tears that fell to the earth and caused flowers to erupt in their wake. Persephone breathed free air again, felt the sun's warmth, heard birds singing songs she had feared she would never hear again, and the earth, responding to Demeter's joy, bloomed. Spring erupted across the world, more glorious than any spring before. Flowers covered every hillside, trees burst into leaf, crops grew with abandoned enthusiasm. It was a celebration of return, of renewal, of second chances. But when the time came for Persephone to return to the underworld, as return she must, for she had eaten those 6 seeds, and divine law cannot be broken, even for a mother's love. Demeter's heart broke anew. The goddess withdrew her blessing once more, and the world descended into winter. Cold winds blew, leaves fell from trees. The land turned brown and barren, sleeping through the dark months, waiting as Demeter waited for spring's return. And so the cycle was established. 6 months of growth and warmth when Persephone walks in the world of light. 6 months of cold and dormancy when she rules beside Hades in the realm of shadow. The seasons themselves, born from a mother's grief and a daughter's obligation. I have watched this cycle repeat countless times, and each year I am struck by its poetry. Winter is not merely cold weather, it is the earth mourning. Spring is not just warming temperatures, it is joy made manifest. Summer's abundance reflects a mother and daughter reunited. Autumn's fading represents the sorrow of approaching separation. Some claim Persephone grew to love Hades, that her initial imprisonment transformed into genuine partnership. Others insist she merely accepted her fate with the grace expected of a queen. I cannot say which is true. Perhaps both are, in their way. Perhaps love and duty and acceptance can all exist together, complex and contradictory, as all the deepest truths tend to be. What I do know is this: every spring, when the first flowers push through the last of winter's snow, I think of a daughter's return. Every autumn, when leaves begin to turn and fall, I remember a mother's anticipating grief, and I am reminded that even the gods cannot escape loss, cannot protect those they love from every danger, cannot hold forever to what they most cherish. The tale of Demeter and Persephone teaches us something profound about the nature of love and letting go. It speaks to every parent who has watched a child grow and leave, to every person who has learned that love sometimes means accepting what we cannot change, that the greatest bonds can endure even separation. And Hades himself, often painted as villain in this tale, was he truly so terrible? He broke no divine law in taking Persephone, having secured Zeus's permission. He treated her with honor once she was in his realm. He even agreed to release her, knowing it would mean his own loneliness returned. Perhaps he is not the monster of the story, but rather another victim of circumstance, of desire that led him to actions he might have reconsidered had he thought of anything beyond his own need. The pomegranate seeds remain the most fascinating element to me. 6 tiny seeds, barely a mouthful, yet they bound a goddess to the underworld for half of all eternity. It speaks to how small choices can have enormous consequences, how a moment's hunger can alter the course of everything that follows. Persephone could not have known what those seeds would cost her. But then, do any of us truly know the full weight of our smallest decisions? In temples across ancient Greece, women honored Demeter with mysteries. They understood what this myth truly taught, that loss is inevitable, that darkness comes to us all, but that return is also possible, that winter always yields to spring, that separation, however painful, need not mean the end of love. I have stood in those ruined temples, felt the echoes of those ancient rituals still resonating through stone and time. The mystery at the heart of Demeter and Persephone's story was not just about seasons or agriculture. It was about accepting that we cannot shield those we love from every hardship, that growing up sometimes means descending into darkness, and that the deepest love is proven not in preventing all pain, but in welcoming the beloved home again when they return. Chapter 6: The Firebringer and the Jar of Sorrows. Among all the gods and titans, there was one whose name would become synonymous with both compassion and suffering, whose gift to humanity would be paid for with the most terrible of prices. His name was Prometheus, and his story is one of noble sacrifice and cosmic consequence. Prometheus' forethought was a titan, but unlike his brothers, he possessed something rare among divine beings: genuine care for creatures lesser than himself. When Zeus and his siblings overthrew Cronus, Prometheus had sided with the Olympians, foreseeing their victory. This prescience saved him from Tartarus, and Zeus, in gratitude, gave him and his brother Epimetheus a task of profound importance. "Create life to populate the earth," Zeus commanded. "Fill this world with creatures that will honor the gods and make this cosmos less empty." The brothers set to work with divine clay and cosmic creativity. Epimetheus, afterthought, was enthusiastic but impulsive. He shaped the beasts of field and forest, sea and sky, giving each a gift. To the birds, he gave the power of flight. To the lion, strength and majesty. To the elephant, great memory and wisdom. To the fish, the ability to breathe beneath the waves. He worked with abandon, delighting in each new creation. Prometheus was more careful, more deliberate. He saved humanity for last, wanting to make them special, worthy of the care he would take in their creation. He molded them from clay, shaping them to stand upright, to look toward the heavens rather than down at the ground like the beasts. Athena, moved by the beauty of his work, breathed divine life into these forms, and humanity drew its first breath. But then Prometheus discovered a terrible oversight. His brother, in his enthusiasm, had distributed all the gifts. The swift had their speed, the strong their might, the armored their protection. Humanity had ... nothing. They were naked, vulnerable, weaker than the lion, slower than the deer, without claws or fangs or venom or flight. They were, in every practical sense, helpless. Prometheus looked upon his creations and felt his heart stir with pity and love. These beings, standing upright and looking toward the stars, deserved better than to huddle in caves, frightened of every shadow, dying from exposure and predation. They had intelligence, yes, that gift Athena had bestowed, but intelligence without tools to use it is like a lamp without oil. He made a decision that would echo through all of history. He would give them fire. Now, you must understand, fire was not merely a tool. It was divine, sacred, the exclusive property of the gods. Fire represented power, transformation, the ability to change the world rather than merely exist within it. To give fire to mortals was to give them agency, independence, the capacity to rise above their station. Prometheus waited until night, when the halls of Olympus grew quiet. He crept to the forge of Hephaestus, where the sacred flames burned eternal. With a hollow fennel stalk, he captured a burning ember, just one small piece of divine fire, and descended to the mortal world. I can almost see it, Prometheus kneeling before a group of frightened humans huddled in their cave, holding forth this gift that would change everything. He showed them how to nurture the flame, how to feed it, how to control it. And as that first mortal-tended fire blazed to life, driving back the darkness, providing warmth against the cold, protection against the beasts, humanity crossed a threshold. They were no longer merely another species of animal. They were something new. With fire came everything. Cooked food, which allowed them to gain more nutrition, to develop larger brains. Warmth, which allowed them to survive winter and spread to colder climates. Light, which extended their productive hours beyond sunset. The ability to shape metal, to create tools, to build civilization itself. All of this flowed from that single stolen ember. Zeus noticed, of course. How could he not? Smoke rising from 1,000 mortal fires, light piercing the darkness that had always cloaked the earth at night. And when he understood what Prometheus had done, the magnitude of the theft, the presumption of giving mortals power that belonged to gods alone, His rage was terrible to behold. But Prometheus had done more than steal fire. He had, in Zeus's eyes, upset the cosmic order. Mortals were meant to be dependent on gods, to worship and petition and remain in their proper place. Now they had the means to become something else, something potentially dangerous to divine supremacy. Zeus's punishment was twofold. First, for mortals themselves, he would create a gift that was not a gift at all. He commanded Hephaestus to craft the first woman. The smith god, though uneasy with the task, obeyed. He molded her from clay, as Prometheus had molded men, but this creation was different. The gods gathered to bestow upon her qualities. Aphrodite gave her irresistible beauty. Hermes granted her persuasive speech. Athena taught her crafts, but also cunning. They adorned her with jewels and fine clothing. They named her Pandora, all gifts. To Pandora, Zeus gave a jar, not a box, as later translations would have it, a large earthenware jar, sealed with a lid. "This is your dowry," he told her, his smile hiding darker purposes. "But you must never, under any circumstances, open it." Pandora was sent to Epimetheus as a bride. Prometheus had warned his brother, "Accept no gifts from Zeus. He seeks revenge for my actions." But Epimetheus, seeing Pandora's beauty, hearing her voice like honey, forgot his brother's warning entirely. He welcomed her into his home with joy, convinced of his great fortune. Days passed, weeks. Pandora tried to be content, but the jar haunted her thoughts. It sat in the corner of their dwelling, sealed and mysterious. What could be so precious that Zeus himself had given it as dowry? What could be so dangerous that it must never be opened? The questions gnawed at her like hunger, grew in her mind like a sickness. Curiosity, that most human of all traits, overcame her caution. She approached the jar. Her hand reached for the lid. She told herself she would just peek, just a glimpse, then seal it again immediately. Surely such a small transgression could cause no harm. The lid came free, and from the jar erupted a black cloud, thick and choking, spreading through the room, out into the world beyond. Pandora screamed and struggled to replace the lid, but the cloud was already free, already spreading across all the earth. This was Zeus's revenge on humanity. The jar contained all the evils that had not existed in the world before: disease and death, pain and suffering, envy and hatred, greed and cruelty, sorrow and despair. These darknesses poured forth and spread across the earth like a plague, infecting everything they touched. The golden age of humanity, that brief period when they had lived free from such agonies, ended in an instant. Pandora, weeping, finally managed to seal the jar again, but it was too late, almost too late. For one thing remained trapped within hope. Some say it was mercy that left hope for humanity. Others claim it was the cruelest part of the punishment, to give mortals hope that keeps them struggling even when suffering is inevitable. But Zeus was not finished. Prometheus himself had to be punished, and the king of the gods devised a torment specifically designed for a being who could not die. Prometheus was dragged to the Caucasus Mountains, to a high, lonely peak where wind howled and snow never melted. There, using chains forged by Hephaestus, who must have wept as he made them, remembering Prometheus's kindness, he was bound to the rock, immobile, exposed to all weather, and there he would remain. But simple imprisonment was not sufficient punishment in Zeus's eyes. Each day, as the sun rose, an eagle descended from the sky. This was no ordinary bird, but a creature of divine vengeance, and its purpose was singular and terrible. It would land upon Prometheus's chest, pin him with its talons, and with its sharp beak tear open his abdomen. Then it would feast upon his liver. The pain I cannot imagine. The violation, the helplessness, the horror of watching the bird approach each day, knowing what was coming, and being utterly unable to prevent it. But Prometheus was immortal. A Titan does not die from such wounds. And so, each night, after the eagle had eaten its fill and departed, his liver would regenerate. His flesh would knit itself whole. And when morning came again, the eagle would return, and the cycle would begin anew. This was not punishment for a month, or a year, or even a century. Zeus decreed it would last forever, eternal torment for eternal defiance. Yet Prometheus did not recant. Chained to that rock, day after day, enduring agony that would drive lesser beings mad, he never regretted his choice. When visitors came, and some gods did visit, curious or pitying, he would speak of humanity with pride. He had given them fire, yes, but more than that, he had given them potential, the ability to shape their own destiny, to become more than what they were born to be. Let Zeus do his worst, Prometheus would say through gritted teeth as the eagle approached. I would make the same choice again. Humanity deserves better than to grovel in darkness. And I would suffer 1,000 eternities to have given them light. Years became decades, became centuries. The rock was stained with his blood. The eagle grew fat on its daily feast. And still Prometheus endured, a symbol of noble suffering, of sacrifice made knowingly for the benefit of others. The story might have ended there, with eternal punishment for eternal defiance, had not circumstances changed. Heracles, that greatest of mortal heroes, himself a son of Zeus, came to the Caucasus during his labors. He saw Prometheus chained there, saw the eagle descending, and his heroic heart could not abide such suffering. With an arrow from his bow poisoned with the blood of the Hydra, deadly even to immortals, Heracles shot the eagle from the sky. The bird fell dead before it hit the ground. Then Heracles broke Prometheus's chains, though some say Zeus had to give permission for them to be broken. That the king of the gods had finally decided the punishment had lasted long enough. Prometheus was free. But Zeus's justice demanded some form of continued penance. So Prometheus was commanded to wear a ring made from his chains, set with a piece of the rock to which he had been bound. A reminder, forever worn, of the price of defying the will of Zeus. The Titan had sacrificed everything for humanity, his freedom, his comfort, ages of agony, all so that mortals could have fire, could have hope, could have the chance to rise above their circumstances and become something worthy of the gift they had been given. And humanity, they thrived. They built cities and forged tools and created art and developed languages. They tamed the wilderness and sailed the seas and looked up at the stars their maker had taught them to admire. They suffered too, yes, Pandora's jar had seen to that. Disease and death became their constant companions, but they endured, driven by that last thing left in the jar, hope. Sometimes I wonder if Zeus ever regretted his revenge, if he ever looked down from Olympus at what humanity had become, not despite fire, but because of it, and questioned whether Prometheus had been right all along. Whether mortals with agency and power and the ability to shape their world might be more worthy of divine attention than simple, helpless worshippers could ever be. But the gods rarely admit error, and Zeus least of all. What remains is this: the image of Prometheus chained to his rock, choosing suffering over submission, choosing humanity's potential over his own comfort. He stands as one of the great examples of selfless sacrifice, of standing by one's principles, no matter the cost. A titan who acted with more humanity than most humans could manage. A creator who loved his creation enough to suffer eternally for their benefit. And every time we kindle a flame, every time fire pushes back darkness and cold and fear, we honor his gift. Whether we know his name or not, whether we remember his sacrifice or not, we live in the world his choice created. We are the children of Prometheus's compassion, and our very existence is the ultimate vindication of his choice. Chapter 7. The Monster Slayer and his 12 impossibilities. There are heroes, and then there are legends that transcend heroism itself, that become synonymous with strength and courage and endurance against impossible odds. Heracles, or Hercules, as the Romans would later call him, was such a legend, a figure who bridged the gap between gods and mortals, and whose labors would become the very definition of heroic achievement. His birth itself was wrapped in both glory and tragedy. Zeus, in one of his many infidelities, descended to the mortal world and lay with Alcmene, a princess of extraordinary virtue. From this union came Heracles, a child who was both mortal and divine, who carried the blood of the king of the gods, but remained bound by mortal flesh. Hera, Zeus's wife, learned of this latest betrayal, and her rage was absolute. She had endured countless infidelities, but this, another heroic son, another reminder of her husband's wandering eye, was too much. She vowed that this child would know suffering, that his life would be marked by trials that would break any lesser being. Even as an infant, Heracles showed his extraordinary nature. Hera sent 2 enormous serpents to his cradle, thinking to end the threat before it could grow. But the baby grasped the serpents by their throats and strangled them with his bare hands, laughing as he did so. His mortal mother found him playing with their corpses like toys. He grew into a man of phenomenal strength, not merely strong, you understand. Heracles could accomplish physical feats that seemed to defy natural law. He could wrestle lions, move boulders that teams of oxen could not budge, bend iron as if it were clay. Combined with his strength was courage that never wavered, and a determination that could not be broken. He married, had children. For a brief time, it seemed he might escape Hera's curse, might live a normal life despite his extraordinary gifts. But the goddess's vengeance was patient, and when it struck, it was devastating. Hera sent madness upon him, a divine frenzy that clouded his mind and turned his great strength against those he loved most. In his insanity, Heracles saw enemies where there were none. He attacked his own family. When the madness cleared and he stood amid the bodies of his wife and children, all slain by his own hands, the anguish nearly destroyed him. He would have taken his own life had not his mortal father stopped him. Instead, he sought purification, penance, some way to atone for the unforgivable. He was directed to his cousin, Eurystheus, king of Tyrants, a petty, fearful man who had always envied Heracles' strength. The oracle declared that Heracles must serve Eurystheus for 12 years, performing whatever labors the king demanded. Only then would he be cleansed of his blood guilt, would his tortured soul find peace. Eurystheus, guided by Hera's malice, devised 12 tasks. Each one was designed to be impossible, to end in Heracles' death. Each one would become legendary. The first labor seemed straightforward: slay the Nemean lion. But this was no ordinary beast. Its hide was impervious to weapons. Arrows bounced off, swords shattered against it, spears could not pierce it. The lion had terrorized the region for years, and no hunter had ever returned from attempting to kill it. Heracles tracked the beast to its lair, a cave with 2 entrances. He blocked one, then entered through the other, carrying only his club and his bare hands. The lion charged. Heracles struck it with his club. The blow would have shattered an ox's skull. The lion barely flinched. His arrows were useless. His sword broke. So Heracles did what only Heracles could do. He wrestled the lion with his bare hands, wrapped his impossible arms around its throat, and strangled it until it moved no more. Then, unable to skin it with any blade, he used the lion's own claws to cut away its hide. From that day forward, he wore the Nemean lion's skin as a cloak, its head as a helmet. It became his signature, the image by which he would be known for all time. The second labor sent him against the Lernaean Hydra, a serpent with 9 heads that lived in the swamps of Lerna. This creature's breath was poisonous, its blood so venomous that even its scent could kill. And for every head Heracles cut off, 2 more grew in its place. How do you defeat an enemy that multiplies with each wound? Heracles brought his nephew Iolaus with him. As Heracles cut off each head, Iolaus would sear the next stump with a burning torch, preventing new heads from growing. One by one, they worked through the heads until only the central, immortal head remained. This one, Heracles could not kill, so he cut it off and buried it beneath a massive rock, trapping it for all eternity. Then he dipped his arrows in the Hydra's blood, making them deadly, poisonous weapons that could kill even immortals. The third labor was different, not a beast to slay, but a creature to capture alive. The Cyrenian hind was a golden deer, sacred to Artemis, so swift that it could outrun an arrow. For a full year, Heracles pursued it, tracking it across Greece and beyond, until finally he managed to trap it without harming it, carrying it back to Eurystheus on his shoulders. The fourth labor took him into dangerous territory indeed, capturing the Erymanthian boar alive. This massive beast lived high in the mountains, and its tusks could gore through armor. Heracles chased it into deep snow, where it became trapped, then bound it with chains and carried it back. Eurystheus was so terrified when he saw it that he hid in a bronze jar buried in the ground. For the fifth labor, Eurystheus chose humiliation over danger. King Augeas had stables housing thousands of cattle that had not been cleaned in 30 years. The filth was mountainous, the stench unbearable. Clean the Augean stables in a single day, an impossible, degrading task for a hero of Heracles' stature. But Heracles simply diverted to rivers to flow through the stables, washing away the accumulated filth in hours. The sixth labor sent him against the Stymphalian birds, man-eating creatures with bronze beaks and sharp metallic feathers they could launch like arrows. Heracles used bronze castanets, given to him by Athena, to frighten them into the air, then shot them down with his poisoned arrows. The seventh task was to capture the Cretan bull, a magnificent beast that was ravaging the island of Crete. Heracles wrestled it into submission and carried it across the sea on his back. The eighth labor required him to capture the man-eating mares of Diomedes. These horses fed on human flesh, and their master would feed them strangers who came to his kingdom. Heracles fed Diomedes himself to his own horses, then tamed the beasts and brought them back. For the ninth labor, he was sent to retrieve the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. These warrior women had never been conquered. But Hippolyta was so impressed by Heracles that she offered to give him the girdle peacefully. However, Hera, still meddling, spread rumors that Heracles intended to kidnap the queen, forcing a battle that ended in Hippolyta's death, another tragedy in his wake. The 10th labor sent him to the ends of the earth itself to capture the cattle of Geryon, a three-bodied giant who lived on an island in the far west, beyond the known world. Heracles journeyed to the very edge of the ocean, erected 2 great pillars to mark how far he had come. The pillars of Heracles, now the Strait of Gibraltar. Then fought Geryon and his 2-headed dog, claiming the cattle and driving them all the way back to Greece. The 11th labor took him beyond the mortal world entirely. He was commanded to retrieve the golden apples of the Hesperides, which grew in a garden at the world's end, guarded by nymphs and a 100-headed dragon. The apples granted immortality, and no mortal had ever taken them. Heracles, clever as well as strong, convinced the Titan Atlas to retrieve the apples for him. Atlas, who held the sky on his shoulders as punishment for the Titanomachi, agreed if Heracles would hold the heavens while he was gone. Heracles shouldered the weight of the entire sky, felt the cosmos pressing down on him, and endured until Atlas returned. When Atlas, tasting freedom, tried to trick Heracles into keeping the burden, the hero used cunning to return it to the Titan's shoulders. But the 12th labor, this was the one meant to kill him, the one from which no mortal could return. Eurystheus commanded him to descend into the underworld itself and bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed dog that guarded the gates of Hades' realm. Heracles descended into death while still living. He passed Charon on the river Styx, walked through the fields of Asphodel, where the shades of the dead drifted like smoke. He approached Hades' throne, and the god of the dead, impressed by his courage, made him an offer. You may take Cerberus to the surface, but only if you can subdue him without weapons, using your strength alone. Heracles grappled with the monstrous hound, endured its venomous bites, its 3 sets of tearing fangs, but his strength prevailed. He carried Cerberus up to the world of light, showed it to the cowering Eurystheus, then returned it gently to its post in the underworld. 12 labors, 12 impossibilities, made possible through strength, courage, cleverness, and endurance that surpassed all mortal limits. And yet, for all his achievements, Heracles remained bound by mortal weaknesses. He was subject to rage, to manipulation, to pain, both physical and emotional. His strength could not protect him from his own human nature. In the end, his death came not from any monster or enemy, but from his wife's innocent mistake. Deianira, fearing she was losing his love, used what she thought was a love potion, but was actually Hydra's poison from long ago. The poison burned him from the inside agony that even his strength could not endure. Unable to die, but unable to live with the pain, Heracles built his own funeral pyre and lay upon it. As the flames rose, Zeus finally interceded. He brought his son to Olympus, granting him the immortality he had earned through his suffering and achievements. Heracles became a god, his mortal flesh consumed by fire, his divine essence ascending to take its place among the Olympians. Even Hera, her vengeance finally spent, accepted him. He married Hebe, goddess of youth, and found at last the peace that had eluded him in mortal life. Heracles stands as the ultimate symbol of human potential, perfected strength, combined with courage, might tempered by justice, power used in service of something greater than oneself. His labors became the standard against which all heroic deeds were measured. To say someone had performed a Herculean task was to say they had accomplished the seemingly impossible. But I think what makes his story endure is not just his strength, but his suffering. He was not invulnerable. He felt pain, knew grief, endured losses that would have broken lesser beings. His greatest victory was not over any monster, but over despair itself, the choice to continue, to strive, to endure, even when every trial seemed designed to destroy him. In that, perhaps, lies his true immortality. Not in the divine essence Zeus granted him, but in the example he set for every mortal who has faced their own impossible labors and found within themselves the strength to continue. Chapter 8. The Gorgon, the Hero, and the Birth of Wonder. There are monsters in this world whose very existence seems to defy explanation, whose nature is so terrible that merely looking upon them means death. And there are heroes whose courage compels them to face such impossibilities, armed with little more than divine favor and their own audacious will. The tale of Perseus and Medusa is both of these things, and something more. Perseus's birth was itself the stuff of legend. His mother, Dano, was a princess locked in a bronze tower by her father, King Achilles, who had received a prophecy that his daughter's son would one day kill him. But Zeus, seeing her beauty even in her imprisonment, came to her as a shower of golden light, and from their union Perseus was conceived. When Achilles discovered mother and child, he could not bring himself to kill them outright. Such direct murder would bring the wrath of the gods. Instead, he sealed them in a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, leaving their fate to the mercy of Poseidon. The chest drifted for days until it washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, where a kind fisherman found them and brought them to his king Polytics. Perseus grew into a fine young man, strong and clever and devoted to his mother. But King Polytics desired Dano and saw Perseus as an obstacle to his pursuit. At a feast, the king announced he would marry not Dano, but another woman, and each guest must bring a gift of horses. Perseus, poor and possessing no horses, rashly declared he would bring any gift the king desired, even the head of Medusa herself. Polytics smiled. This was exactly what he had hoped for. "Then bring me the Gorgon's head," he said, "or admit yourself unable and step aside from your mother's protection." Perseus had made a promise he could not break, though he had committed himself to what seemed certain death. The Gorgons were three sisters, Steno, Euryale, and Medusa, who lived on an island at the edge of the world. They were horrific to behold, women with brass hands, wings of gold, and hair made of living serpents. But Medusa was the most terrible, for anyone who looked directly upon her face would instantly turn to stone. Around their lair lay a garden of statues, heroes who had attempted what Perseus now proposed, frozen forever in expressions of final terror. But Perseus had something other heroes lacked. He was the son of Zeus, and the gods themselves took interest in his quest. Athena came to him first, offering guidance and her polished shield. "Use this as a mirror," she told him. "Look only at Medusa's reflection, never directly at her face." Hermes arrived next, bringing winged sandals that would allow Perseus to fly, and telling him how to find the three ancient hags who shared one eye and one tooth among them. These sisters knew where the Gorgons dwelt, and Perseus would need to force this knowledge from them. Perseus found the at their post, passing their single eye between them. In the moment when none of them held it, he snatched it away. "Tell me where the Gorgons live," he demanded, "or you shall never see again." Desperate to regain their sight, they told him. But more than that, they revealed the location of certain nymphs who possessed 3 more items he would need: a cap that granted invisibility, a special bag that could safely carry Medusa's severed head, and a curved sword sharp enough to cut through the Gorgon's scales. Armed thus with divine gifts, Perseus flew on Hermes' sandals across the sea to the island where the Gorgons dwell. He descended as night fell, approaching carefully, making no sound. The 3 sisters slept, but even in sleep they were deadly. One glance at Medusa's face, even accidentally, would be his end. Perseus held Athena's shield before him, watching Medusa's reflection in its polished surface. He could see her clearly, the serpents writhing in her hair, her face that had once, perhaps, been beautiful before Athena's curse transformed her. The stories said she had been a mortal woman, a priestess of Athena who had been ravished by Poseidon in the goddess's temple. Athena, unable to punish the god, had instead turned her rage on the victim, transforming Medusa into the monster she now was. With one swift stroke, guided by the reflection, Perseus's sword cleaved through Medusa's neck. Her head came free, and from the stump of her neck, 2 beings emerged: the winged horse Pegasus and the warrior Chrysaor, offspring of her union with Poseidon, carried within her all this time. The other 2 Gorgons woke, shrieking with rage. But Perseus had already placed Medusa's head in the special bag and donned the cap of invisibility. They could not see him to pursue him. He flew away on his winged sandals, Medusa's head secure, his impossible task accomplished. But his adventures were not over. Flying over the coast of Ethiopia, he saw a woman chained to a rock at the sea's edge, waves crashing around her. This was Andromeda, daughter of Queen Cassiopeia, who had boasted that her daughter was more beautiful than the sea nymphs. Poseidon, angered by this insult, had sent a sea monster to ravage the coast, and the oracle declared that only by sacrificing Andromeda could the monster be appeased. Perseus descended, and even with her face marked by tears, even facing certain death, Andromeda was indeed beautiful. "I will save you," he declared, "if your father grants you to me as my bride." The bargain was struck. The sea monster emerged from the depths, massive and terrible, and Perseus drew Medusa's head from its bag. Even in death, her power remained. The monster looked upon the Gorgon's face and turned instantly to stone, a statue sinking into the sea. Perseus freed Andromeda and claimed her as his bride. But her uncle Phineus, who had been promised Andromeda in marriage, objected violently. He and his soldiers crashed the wedding feast, weapons drawn. Perseus warned them to look away, then drew forth Medusa's head once more. Phineus and his men became a hall full of statues, frozen mid-attack, preserved forever in their aggression. With Andromeda at his side, Perseus returned to Seriphos, only to find that King Polydex had been terrorizing his mother, trying to force her into marriage. Perseus strode into the king's hall, where Polydex sat with his nobles, and announced he had returned with the promised gift. "You lie," Polydex scoffed. "No one could accomplish such a feat." "Then behold," Perseus said, and drew Medusa's head from the bag. Polydex and all his court turned to stone, a throne room of statues ruling nothing. Perseus had accomplished what no other hero could, had faced the Gorgon and lived, had used her terrible power to save innocents and punish the wicked. He gave Medusa's head to Athena, who placed it on her shield, the Aegis, where it would remain forever, a reminder of divine justice and a weapon against the goddess's enemies. Perseus and Andromeda lived long and happy lives, ruling wisely, having children who would found great dynasties. But the prophecy about his grandfather Achilles still lingered. Years later, Perseus attended athletic games in a distant city. During the discus throw, his throw went astray, striking and killing a man in the crowd. That man was Achilles, who had been living in exile, still trying to escape his fate. The prophecy was fulfilled, not through murder or vengeance, but through accident and tragic inevitability. What strikes me most about this tale is not Perseus's courage, though that was considerable, but his resourcefulness. He could not defeat Medusa through strength, greater heroes than he had tried and become stone. Instead, he used cunning, divine gifts, and clever application of the tools given to him. He looked not directly, but in reflection, understanding that sometimes the indirect approach is the only way to face impossible dangers. And Medusa herself, the monster who had once been a woman, punished for a crime committed against her, transformed into a creature of nightmare through no fault of her own. In her death, she birthed wonders, Pegasus, the winged horse that would carry heroes and inspire poets for generations. Even severed from her body, her head retained power to protect the innocent and petrify the wicked. She was victim and monster, cursed and powerful, tragic and terrible, all at once. The story reminds us that heroism is not always about brute force or fearless confrontation. Sometimes it requires wisdom to know when to look away, when to use a mirror instead of direct sight, when to accept help from those wiser and more powerful than ourselves. Perseus succeeded not because he was the strongest, but because he was clever enough to understand his limitations and work around them. And in the birth of Pegasus, from Medusa's blood, we see transformation, how even from violence and death, beauty and wonder can emerge. That winged horse would become a symbol of inspiration itself, associated with poetry and artistic achievement. Something pure, born from something tainted, hope arising from tragedy. I have often pondered whether Athena, placing Medusa's head upon her shield, felt any regret for the curse she had laid upon the priestess so long ago. Whether she recognized that her punishment had been unjust, that Medusa had deserved protection rather than transformation. But the gods rarely express such doubts, and Athena wore the Gorgon's face as a badge of power, not penance. Chapter 9. The Labyrinth, the Beast, and the Abandoned Thread. On the island of Crete, where the sun beats down on white stone and the sea stretches blue to every horizon, there once stood a palace of such magnificence that even other kings spoke of it with envy. This was Knossos, palace of King Minos, son of Zeus and Europa. But beneath its beauty, within its depths, lurked a secret that cast a shadow over all that splendor. The story begins with pride and punishment, as so many Greek tales do. Minos, establishing his right to rule Crete over his brothers, had prayed to Poseidon for a sign of divine favor. "Send me a bull from the sea," he had asked, "and I shall sacrifice it in your honor, proving that the gods support my claim to the throne." Poseidon obliged. From the foam and spray, a bull emerged, magnificent beyond description, white as sea foam, powerful as the waves themselves. It was the most perfect creature Minos had ever seen, and in that moment of seeing, his heart filled with greed. Such a bull could sire a herd of exceptional cattle. Such a bull was too valuable to simply slaughter on an altar. Surely Poseidon would not mind if he substituted another, lesser bull from his own herds. But gods notice everything, and Poseidon was not pleased. He had given Minos exactly what was asked for, with the understanding that it would be returned as sacrifice. To keep it was theft, was impiety, was the kind of arrogance that could not go unpunished. Poseidon's revenge was intricate and terrible. He enlisted Aphrodite's aid, and together they cursed Queen Pasiphae, Minos's wife, with an unnatural passion. She looked upon the white bull and felt desire that consumed all reason, all shame, all natural order. Desperate and driven mad by this imposed lust, Pasiphae turned to Daedalus, the master craftsman and inventor who had designed the magnificent palace. "Help me," she begged, and perhaps he pitied her. Or perhaps he was simply too fascinated by the technical challenge to refuse. Daedalus constructed a hollow cow, so realistic that even the bull itself would be deceived. He built it from wood and leather, creating a chamber within where Pasiphae could hide. The plan worked horribly. The white bull, deceived by the artifice, mounted the false cow, and Pasiphae achieved her cursed union. From this unnatural coupling, a child was born, if we can call it a child. The Minotaur, half human, half bull, belonging fully to neither world. As an infant, it might have seemed merely strange, but as it grew, its bull nature dominated. It became wild, violent, with an insatiable hunger for human flesh. It could not be reasoned with, could not be tamed, could not be allowed to roam free. Minos, horrified and ashamed, again turned to Daedalus. "Build me a prison," he commanded, "from which this creature can never escape, where it can be contained but need never be seen." And so Daedalus designed his masterpiece and his curse, the labyrinth. It was not merely a maze, you understand. It was a puzzle of such complexity that anyone who entered would be forever lost, wandering its twisting corridors until they died of thirst or exhaustion, or fell prey to the beast that dwelt at its heart. The walls shifted, or seemed to. The paths doubled back on themselves. Rooms led to rooms that led to rooms that led back to the beginning, or to dead ends, or to the Minotaur's lair. There was no map, no thread of logic one could follow. It was chaos given architecture, madness made into stone. Into this prison the Minotaur was placed, and there it might have remained, fed on cattle and criminals, until time itself ended, except that Minos' son, Androgeos, was killed in Athens. Whether it was murder or accident depends on which version of the tale you believe, but Minos blamed the Athenians and declared war. Crete was powerful, Athens vulnerable. The war ended with Athens subjugated, forced to pay a terrible tribute every 9 years. They must send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete. These youths would be fed to the Minotaur, would be sent into the labyrinth to wander until the beast found them and consumed them. It was a tribute of grief, designed to make Athens suffer as Minos had suffered. Twice this tribute was paid. Twice 14 Athenian youths entered the labyrinth and never emerged. Their screams, it was said, could sometimes be heard echoing up from below, faint and terrible. But when the third tribute came due, something changed. Theseus, Prince of Athens, son of King Aegeus, volunteered himself as one of the 7 young men. His father begged him not to go, but Theseus was determined. "I will kill the Minotaur," he declared, "and end this terrible price we pay." He sailed to Crete with the other condemned youths, and when they arrived, they were brought before King Minos, and there, in the palace, Princess Ariadne saw Theseus and fell instantly, desperately in love. Love makes us do remarkable things. Ariadne, who had never defied her father, who had lived her entire life in comfort and obedience, made a choice in that moment that would determine her entire future. She went to Daedalus, the same man who had built the labyrinth, and begged him for help. Give me some way for Theseus to find his way out after he slays the beast. Daedalus, who perhaps felt guilt for all the death his creation had caused, gave her a simple gift, a ball of thread. Have him tie one end to the entrance, he told her, and unwind it as he walks. When he wishes to return, he need only follow the thread back. That night, Ariadne came to where the tribute youths were being held. She gave Theseus the thread and a sword, and whispered instructions. Follow the descending paths, she told him. The Minotaur stays in the deepest part of the labyrinth. Kill it, then follow the thread home to me. Promise me you will take me with you when you leave, Theseus promised. What else could he do when this stranger was offering him the only chance at survival he would have? The next morning, the 14 were sent into the labyrinth. As the door closed behind them, leaving them in darkness, broken only by the torches they carried, Theseus tied the end of Ariadne's thread to the entrance post. Then, telling the others to wait for him, he began to walk, unwinding the thread behind him. The labyrinth was everything Daedalus had designed it to be. Passages branched and rejoined. Stairways led both up and down, with no clear logic. The darkness was oppressive, broken only by his flickering torch. Time lost meaning. Was he walking for hours or days? The thread unwound, and he followed passages downward, always downward, seeking the beast at the maze's heart. And then he heard it, breathing, heavy, bestial breathing, echoing off stone walls. The smell hit him next, blood and decay, the stench of old death. He rounded a corner into a larger chamber, and there, in the center, surrounded by bones, was the Minotaur. It was larger than he had imagined, more terrible, the body of a massively muscled man, but the head of a bull, with horns that could gore through armor. It turned at his approach, and for a moment, Theseus saw something in its eyes, not just animal hunger, but something else, confusion, suffering, the awareness of a curse it had never chosen. But there was no time for pity. The Minotaur charged, bellowing, and Theseus barely dodged aside. They fought in that bone-strewn chamber, man against beast, bronze sword against horn and hoof. Theseus was younger, quicker, but one solid blow from those horns would mean death. They circled, struck, parried. His blade found flesh, drawing dark blood. The Minotaur's horn tore through his tunic, barely missing skin. The battle seemed to last forever, but finally, exhausted, the Minotaur made a mistake. It charged once more, and Theseus, instead of dodging aside, dropped to the ground and thrust his sword upward. The blade sank deep into the beast's throat, and the Minotaur collapsed, its blood pooling on the stone floor, mixing with the remains of all its victims. Theseus stood over the body, breathing hard, and felt not triumph, but sorrow. This creature had not asked to be born, had not chosen to be what it was. It was as much a victim of the gods' games as anyone else, and now it was dead, and the world would call him hero for killing it. He turned away and began to follow the thread back. Hand over hand, he wound it up, retracing his path perfectly. The thread never lied, never led him astray. Within hours, though it felt like days, he saw torchlight ahead, and then he was at the entrance, and the other 13 were there, alive, waiting. They fled the labyrinth together. Ariadne was waiting, and she led them to the harbor where their ship waited. They sailed away in darkness, taking the princess with them, leaving Crete behind. But here the tale takes a darker turn. They stopped at the island of Naxos to rest, and while Ariadne slept on the beach, Theseus and his crew sailed away, abandoning her. Why? The stories offer different reasons. Some say the god Dionysus appeared to Theseus in a dream and claimed Ariadne for himself. Some say Theseus was simply callous, unwilling to bring a foreign princess home to Athens. Others suggest he had never loved her, had only used her to accomplish his goal, and now she was an inconvenience. Whatever the truth, Ariadne woke to find herself alone on an empty beach, the ship just to sail on the distant horizon. Her screams of betrayal and grief rang across the waves, but Theseus did not turn back. The gods, however, noticed. Dionysus came to her, and whether out of pity or love, made her his bride. She became a goddess, wife to the god of wine and ecstasy, and perhaps found more happiness in divine embrace than she ever would have in mortal Athens. But Theseus's troubles were not over. His father, King Aegeus, had told him, "If you succeed, if you kill the Minotaur and survive, change the black sails on your ship to white, so I will know from afar that you live." But Theseus, in his excitement or grief or simple forgetfulness, did not change the sails. Aegeus stood on a cliff, watching for his son's ship. When he saw the black sails approaching, he knew what they must mean. His son was dead, devoured by the beast, lost in the labyrinth. In his grief, the old king threw himself from the cliff into the sea that would forever after bear his name, the Aegean. So Theseus returned home victorious, but to tragedy, a hero, but also a parricide through negligence. He became king of Athens, and a good king he was, but the shadow of that forgotten sail haunted him always. And what of Daedalus, the architect of all this suffering? When Minos learned that he had helped Theseus escape, had given Ariadne the thread that undid the labyrinth's purpose, he imprisoned Daedalus and his young son Icarus in the very maze he had created. But Daedalus was nothing if not resourceful. Trapped in his own masterwork, he devised an escape no one could have anticipated. He gathered feathers from the birds that flew over the labyrinth. He shaped frames from wood. He joined them with wax, carefully, precisely, creating wings, 2 pairs, one for himself, one for Icarus. And when they were complete, he gave his son careful instructions. Fly neither too low, where the sea spray will dampen the feathers, nor too high, where the sun's heat will melt the wax. Stay the middle course, and we will find freedom. They climbed to the highest point of the labyrinth and leaped into the sky. And oh, the sensation of it, to fly like birds, to soar on winds that had never before held human weight. Daedalus flew carefully, following his own instructions, staying at a moderate height. But Icarus, young and exuberant, felt the joy of flight overwhelm his caution. Higher and higher he climbed, laughing with delight, feeling the sun on his face. His father called out warnings, but the boy was drunk on freedom and flight and did not listen. The wax began to soften, to drip. Feathers came loose, and suddenly one wing collapsed, then the other, and Icarus was falling, tumbling from the sky, his laughter turning to screams. He crashed into the sea and sank beneath the waves, and Daedalus, circling back, could only watch his son disappear into the depths. The genius who had built palaces and prisons, who had solved every technical challenge set before him, could do nothing to save his own child. He buried Icarus on a small island and flew on alone, carrying grief heavier than any chain. The tale of the labyrinth and the Minotaur reminds us that sometimes the prisons we build, whether of stone or pride or circumstance, trap us as surely as they trap those they were meant to contain. That arrogance and broken promises have consequences that ripple outward, claiming innocent lives. That even heroes can be callous. That triumph can be hollow. That escape from one trap often leads us directly into another. But it also teaches us that sometimes the solution to an impossible problem is simple. A thread to guide us home, a clear path through chaos, a helping hand extended when we need it most. And that hubris, flying too high, forgetting our Father's warnings, believing ourselves immune to consequences, always ends in falling. Chapter 10. The Golden Fleece and the Price of Glory in the Ancient Kingdom of Iolcus. There was a prince named Jason, whose right to rule had been stolen by his uncle Peleus. Raised in secret by the centaur Chiron, Jason grew strong and wise, trained in all the arts of heroes. When he came of age, he returned to claim his birthright. Peleus, sitting on a throne that was not his, looked at this young man and saw danger, but he was clever, and rather than openly refuse Jason's claim, which would turn the people against him, he made an offer. "Prove yourself worthy," he said. "Bring me the Golden Fleece from Colchis, that treasure which no man has ever claimed, and I will gladly give you the throne." It was a death sentence, dressed as a challenge. The Golden Fleece hung in a sacred grove at the edge of the world, guarded by a dragon that never slept. The journey to reach it was fraught with dangers, impassable seas, monstrous creatures, hostile kingdoms. No one who had sought it had ever returned, but Jason accepted. And he did something extraordinary. He called for heroes from all across Greece to join him, to crew his ship on this impossible quest. The response was overwhelming. The greatest names of a generation answered: Heracles with his lion skin and club, Orpheus with his lyre, the twins Castor and Polydeuces, the swift-footed Atalanta, and dozens more. They were called the Argonauts, after the ship that would carry them. The Argo, built with timber from the sacred grove of Dodona, and blessed by the goddess Athena herself. The ship set sail on a journey that would become legend. They faced the Harpies, those foul flying creatures that tormented the blind prophet Phineus, stealing his food and leaving only filth. The sons of the north wind drove them away, and Phineus, in gratitude, gave Jason crucial advice about the dangers ahead. They passed through the Symplegades, the clashing rocks that smashed together, crushing any ship that tried to pass between them. Following Phineus's guidance, they released a dove to fly through first. The rocks crashed together, taking only a few tail feathers. And in that moment, when the rocks rebounded, the Argonauts rode with all their might, passing through just as the rocks began to close again. The Argo lost only the tip of its stern ornament. After a ship passed through safely, the rocks were destined to remain forever open. They encountered sirens whose songs promised knowledge of all things, whose voices could lure sailors to their deaths. But Orpheus played his lyre, and his music was so beautiful that it drowned out even the sirens' deadly melodies. They stopped at Lemnos, an island inhabited only by women who had killed all their men in revenge for being spurned. They faced giants who threw boulders from cliff tops. They lost companions to storms and monsters and simple misfortune. But they pressed on, driven by Jason's determination and the promise of glory. Finally, they reached Colchis, the kingdom at the world's edge, where the Golden Fleece hung in its sacred grove. King Ates, who possessed the fleece, had no intention of giving it up. But bound by the laws of hospitality, he could not simply refuse Jason's request. Instead, like Peleus before him, he set an impossible challenge. "I will give you the fleece," Ates said, "if you can yoke my fire-breathing bulls, plow a field with them, sow the field with dragon's teeth, and defeat the armed warriors that spring from the planted teeth. All this you must do in a single day." The bulls were bronze and massive, and from their mouths came flames hot enough to melt stone. The dragon's teeth, once planted, would sprout into fierce warriors that attacked anyone nearby. It was meant to be impossible. It was meant to end with Jason's death. But Ates had not accounted for his daughter. Medea was a priestess of Hecate, skilled in sorcery and potions, powerful in her own right. When she saw Jason, handsome, courageous, doomed, something stirred in her heart. Or perhaps Hera, who favored Jason, arranged for Aphrodite to have Eros shoot Medea with one of his arrows. Either way, the result was the same. Medea fell deeply, desperately in love. She came to Jason in secret. "I will help you," she said, "but you must promise to take me with you when you leave, to marry me and make me your wife." Jason, seeing no other path to success, agreed. He would have agreed to anything in that moment. Medea gave him a potion to rub on his skin and weapons, making him invulnerable to fire and bronze for one day. She told him how to defeat the warriors. "Throw a stone among them, and they will fight each other, forgetting you entirely." Jason followed her instructions. He yoked the fire-breathing bulls, enduring their flames without harm. He plowed the field and sowed the teeth. When the warriors sprouted from the ground, fully armed and seeking his death, he threw a stone into their midst. Confusion spread among them, each thinking another had struck him, and they turned on each other until all lay dead in the field they had just emerged from. Ates was forced to admit that Jason had completed the task, but the king had no intention of honoring his word. He planned to burn the Argo and kill the Argonauts as they slept. Medea, learning of her father's betrayal, warned Jason. "Tonight," she said, "we must take the fleece tonight and flee." She led him to the sacred grove where the Golden Fleece hung on an oak tree, gleaming even in darkness, beautiful beyond description. But coiled around the tree's trunk was the dragon, a serpent so large that its body wrapped around the tree multiple times, with eyes that never closed, teeth as long as swords. Medea sang to it. She used her magic, her knowledge of herbs and incantations. She lulled the eternal guardian to sleep for the first time since it had begun its vigil. And while it slumbered, Jason seized the Golden Fleece and they ran, Medea's younger brother, Apsyrtus, coming with them. The princess unwilling to leave him to face their father's rage alone. They sailed away in darkness, but Ates pursued with his fleet, and here the tale takes its darkest turn. To slow her father's pursuit, Medea did something unspeakable. She killed her own brother, cut his body into pieces, and threw them into the sea. Ates, seeing his son's remains floating in the water, stopped to gather them for proper burial, and the Argo escaped. The voyage home was long and dangerous. Some say they traveled strange routes, up rivers no one had charted, through lands that existed on no maps. But finally, they returned to Iolcus, the Golden Fleece in hand, Jason's quest complete. Peleus, however, refused to honor his promise. The throne remained his, and he had no intention of surrendering it to anyone. Medea, furious at yet another betrayal, used her sorcery to exact revenge. She convinced Peleus's daughters that she could make their aging father young again, demonstrating by cutting up an old ram and boiling it with herbs, producing a young lamb from the pot through trickery, of course. The daughters, desperate to help their father, cut Peleus into pieces and boiled him. No young king emerged from that pot. Only death. Jason and Medea fled again, eventually settling in Corinth. They had children. For a time, they seemed happy. But Jason, perhaps tired of being associated with a foreign sorceress, perhaps ambitious for political alliance, perhaps simply callous, chose to abandon Medea and marry the daughter of Corinth's king. Medea's rage was apocalyptic. She had betrayed her father for him, killed her brother for him, used her power to help him achieve glory, and now he cast her aside for a younger bride, a more politically useful alliance. She sent a poisoned robe to Jason's new bride as a wedding gift. When the girl put it on, it burst into flames, killing both her and her father, who tried to save her. And then, and this is where the tale becomes almost unbearable, Medea killed her own children by Jason, preferring to see them dead than raised by their father and his new wife. Jason, who had set out as a hero seeking glory, ended his days broken and alone. The Argo, his magnificent ship, was eventually beached and left to rot. One day, Jason sat beneath it, remembering his glorious youth. A timber loosened from the decaying stern and fell, striking him on the head and killing him. A pathetic end for one who had been the greatest hero of his age. The tale of Jason and the Argonauts begins as a grand adventure, heroes banding together, facing impossible challenges, claiming legendary treasure, but it ends in betrayal, murder, vengeance, and sorrow. The Golden Fleece, won at such cost, brought no happiness to anyone. The glory Jason sought turned to ashes. The woman who loved him became his destroyer. The quest that should have been his greatest triumph became the source of his ultimate tragedy. I think often of Medea in this tale. She was brilliant, powerful, capable of feats that even the heroes could not accomplish. She gave up everything, family, homeland, innocence, for love of a man who ultimately saw her only as a tool to be used and then discarded. Her revenge was monstrous, yes, but born from a pain so profound that it consumed everything, even her own maternal love. And Jason himself, was he hero or villain? He accomplished the impossible quest, gathered the greatest warriors of his age, retrieved the Golden Fleece that no one else could claim. But he did so through the power and sacrifice of others, particularly Medea. When glory was his, he proved himself capable of the same betrayals that had been practiced upon him. Perhaps that is the true lesson, that heroism in adventure does not guarantee nobility in character, that one can be brave facing monsters, yet cowardly when facing the consequences of one's promises. The Golden Fleece itself remains an enigma. Some say it was the hide of a ram that could fly, sent by the gods to save 2 children from sacrifice. Others claim it represented the wealth and power of distant kingdoms. But whatever it truly was, it became a symbol of the price of glory, that sometimes what we pursue most desperately brings only ruin, that the treasure we fight so hard to claim can turn to poison in our hands. And the Argonauts themselves, those legendary heroes who sailed together, what became of them? They scattered after the quest, returning to their own kingdoms and fates. Some would have further adventures, Others would die in obscure ways, their moment of glory behind them. They had achieved something remarkable, but the achievement itself could not protect them from the tragedies that awaited. The story asks us uncomfortable questions. Is success worth any price? Does the end justify the means? Can love turn to hate so completely that it destroys everything, even that which we created from that love? And perhaps most troubling, if we achieve our life's great goal, our defining quest, what happens to us afterward? What do we become when the thing we spent everything pursuing is finally in our grasp? Chapter 11. The war that echoed through time, of all the tales that have come down to us through the turning of ages. None has captured imagination quite like the Trojan War. It was not merely a conflict between kingdoms, but a collision of destinies, a gathering of heroes, a testament to how the pettiness of gods and the passions of mortals can combine to create tragedy on a scale that reshapes the world. It began, as so many disasters do, at a wedding. The sea goddess Thetis was marrying the mortal hero Peleus, and all the gods of Olympus were invited to celebrate, all save one. Eris, the goddess of discord and strife, was deliberately excluded, for who wants chaos at a wedding? But Eris was not one to accept such a slight graciously. She appeared anyway, uninvited and unwelcome, and in the midst of the celebration she produced a golden apple. Upon its skin was inscribed a simple phrase, "To the fairest." Then she rolled it across the floor and vanished, leaving only laughter echoing behind her. 3 goddesses reached for the apple simultaneously: Hera, queen of the gods; Athena, goddess of wisdom; and Aphrodite, embodiment of beauty itself. Each believed herself the fairest. Each demanded the apple as her rightful due. The celebration dissolved into argument, and the argument threatened to tear Olympus apart. Zeus, wise enough to know that choosing among his wife, his daughter, and the goddess of beauty would end badly no matter whom he selected, refused to judge. Instead, he declared that a mortal would decide, specifically Paris, a prince of Troy who was said to have impeccable judgment and no fear of speaking truth. Paris was living as a shepherd on Mount Ida at the time, having been exiled as an infant due to a prophecy that he would bring about Troy's destruction. But prophecies have a way of fulfilling themselves, no matter how we try to avoid them. The 3 goddesses appeared before Paris, each more radiant than anything a mortal should have to endure seeing, and each offered him a bribe. Hera promised power. "Choose me, and I will make you ruler of all Asia, king of kings, lord of vast empires." Athena offered glory. "Choose me, and I will make you the greatest warrior who ever lived, victorious in every battle, renowned for all time." Aphrodite whispered something different. "Choose me, and I will give you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world." Paris, young and foolish and thinking with something other than wisdom, chose Aphrodite. He gave her the apple, and in that moment he sealed the fate of Troy and countless thousands who would die in the war to come. The most beautiful woman in the world was Helen, and there was a complication. She was already married. Her husband was Menelaus, king of Sparta, one of the most powerful rulers in Greece. But Aphrodite had made a promise, and gods keep their promises, even when the keeping brings catastrophe. Paris traveled to Sparta as a guest, welcomed into Menelaus's palace with all the hospitality that Greek custom demanded. And there he saw Helen, and she saw him, and Aphrodite's power ensured that neither could resist. Whether Helen went willingly or was abducted against her will, the stories differ. But the result was the same. Paris and Helen fled to Troy together, and behind them they left outrage, humiliation, and the seeds of war. Menelaus, discovering his wife gone and his honor violated, called upon his brother Agamemnon, the most powerful king in Greece. And Agamemnon called upon all the Greek kingdoms, reminding them that years before, when Helen had been of marriageable age and every prince in Greece had sought her hand, they had all sworn an oath. They had promised that if anyone ever wronged Helen's husband, all would come to his aid. The oath had seemed harmless at the time, a formality to prevent conflict among the suitors. Now it became a summons to war. The greatest heroes of Greece assembled. Achilles, mightiest of warriors, nearly invincible in battle, whose very name would become synonymous with martial excellence. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, clever beyond measure, reluctant to leave his wife Penelope, an infant son to Telemachus. Ajax, massive and powerful, second only to Achilles in combat. Diomedes, Nestor, Patroclus. The names rolled on like thunder. They gathered a fleet of 1,000 ships and sailed for Troy. The siege that followed would last 10 years. 10 years of battle and blood, of heroes falling and glory won, and lives wasted on the beach before Troy's impregnable walls. Troy itself was magnificent, its walls so high and thick that no siege engine could breach them, built by gods in ages past. Within those walls, the Trojans prepared for war. Hector, eldest son of King Priam, took command of the defense. He was everything a hero should be: brave, honorable, devoted to family and city. A warrior without peer, save for Achilles himself. The war became a testing ground for heroes, a place where mortal men could achieve immortality through deeds of valor. The plain before Troy ran red with blood. Men whose names would echo through history fought and died there. Achilles was the terror of the battlefield. When he fought, the Trojans fell like wheat before a scythe. He seemed untouchable, invincible. His mother had dipped him as an infant in the river Styx, making his flesh impervious to weapons. Only his heel, where she had held him, remained vulnerable. But his pride was as great as his prowess, and when Agamemnon insulted him, taking a captive woman from him, Achilles withdrew from battle entirely. Without him, the Greeks began to lose. Hector led the Trojans on the offensive, pushing the Greeks back to their ships, threatening to burn the fleet and strand them forever on Troy's shores. The Greeks, desperate, begged Achilles to return. He refused, nursing his wounded pride, while his companions died. But then Patroclus, Achilles' beloved friend, some say lover, could bear no more. He begged Achilles to lend him his armor, so that the Trojans would think Achilles had returned and retreat in fear. Achilles agreed, warning Patroclus only to drive the Trojans from the ships, not to pursue them to the walls. Patroclus donned Achilles' armor and entered the battle. And at first, it worked. The Trojans fell back, seeing what they thought was Achilles returned. But Patroclus, caught up in battle fury, forgot the warning. He pursued the Trojans to the very walls of the city, and there Hector confronted him. The duel was fierce, but decided. Hector's spear found its mark, and Patroclus fell, dying in Achilles' borrowed armor. Hector took the armor as spoils, not knowing what fury he had just unleashed. When Achilles learned of Patroclus' death, his grief was beyond measure. It transformed into rage, into a hunger for vengeance that consumed everything else. He returned to battle, clad in new armor, forged by Hephaestus himself, decorated with scenes of cosmic significance. And he sought Hector. The Trojan prince knew what was coming. He knew that facing Achilles meant death, but he was Troy's champion, and he could not hide within the walls while his people needed him. He went out to meet Achilles, though his heart must have trembled at the sight of the Greek hero burning with wrath. They fought before the walls, while all Troy watched from above, and all Greece watched from below. It was not even close. Achilles, driven by grief and rage, was unstoppable. He struck Hector down, killed him, and then, in an act that horrified both sides, he tied Hector's corpse to his chariot and dragged it around the walls of Troy, defiling the body, denying it the funeral rites that honor demanded. For days he did this, dragging Hector's corpse in the dust, unable to let go of his grief and rage. Until finally, in the night, an old man came to his tent. King Priam, Hector's father, had crossed the Greek lines alone, unarmed, to beg for his son's body. The meeting between them is one of the most poignant in all of Greek myth. Priam knelt before the man who had killed his son and kissed the hands that had struck the fatal blow. He begged, not as a king, but as a father. "Think of your own father," he said. "Would you not want his body returned to him for proper burial?" And something in Achilles broke. His rage drained away, leaving only grief. He wept, and Priam wept with him, and for a moment the war did not matter. There was only shared sorrow, the universal pain of loss. Achilles gave back Hector's body and granted a truce for the funeral. But the war continued. Achilles knew his own death was coming. Prophecy had declared he would die at Troy, young and glorious, rather than old and forgotten. And prophecy was fulfilled when Paris, guided by the god Apollo, shot an arrow that found the one vulnerable spot on Achilles' body. His heel, the greatest warrior of the age, died from a wound to his foot, and the Greeks mourned as they had never mourned before. The war dragged on, year after year, neither side able to gain final victory. Troy's walls remained unbreached. The Greeks grew weary, their supplies dwindling, their heroes falling. They needed something new, some stratagem that could end the stalemate. It was Odysseus who conceived the plan that would finally break Troy. He would give the Trojans what appeared to be a gift, a token of surrender. He would build a great wooden horse, hollow inside, large enough to hold men. The Greeks would sail away, apparently admitting defeat, and they would leave the horse on the beach as an offering to the gods for safe passage home. The horse was built, huge and magnificent. Inside, Odysseus and a select group of warriors hid in silence. The rest of the Greek fleet sailed away, but only to a nearby island where they would wait. The Trojans, seeing the Greeks departed and only the horse remaining, debated what to do. Some urged caution. The priest Laocoon famously warned, "I fear the Greeks, even when bearing gifts," but others saw it as a victory monument, a sign that the gods had finally granted them peace. They dragged the horse inside the city walls, celebrating their apparent victory. That night, when Troy slept drunk on wine and relief, the men inside the horse emerged. They opened the gates. The Greek fleet, which had returned under cover of darkness, poured into the city, and Troy, undefeated for 10 years of siege, fell in a single night of slaughter. The sack of Troy was brutal. Men were killed, women enslaved, children thrown from the walls. The great city burned, its towers collapsing, its wealth plundered. King Priam was slaughtered at his own altar. Hector's infant son was thrown from the walls to prevent him from growing up to avenge his father. Helen was reclaimed by Menelaus, though whether he took her back out of love or simply to reclaim his property, the stories differ. The war that had begun with a golden apple and a beauty contest ended with fire and blood and ashes. Troy fell. The Greeks won. But victory felt hollow. So many dead, so much destruction. And for what? For one woman, for pride, for the games of gods who had chosen sides and manipulated mortals like pieces on a game board. The heroes who survived found that victory brought no peace. Agamemnon returned home only to be murdered by his wife and her lover. Ajax went mad and killed himself. Diomedes was exiled from his own kingdom. And Odysseus, clever Odysseus, architect of Troy's fall, found that his journey home would take another 10 years, filled with perils that would test him as thoroughly as the war itself had tested his cunning. The Trojan War stands as mythology's great epic, a story that encompasses everything: love and hate, honor and betrayal, glory and tragedy. It shows us heroes at their finest and worst. It demonstrates how small choices, a golden apple, an oath, a guest's betrayal, can cascade into consequences that destroy nations. But perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that there are no clean victories, that war, no matter how heroic the individuals who fight it, is ultimately about destruction, that the glory won comes at a terrible price, paid in blood and grief and lives cut short, that the survivors carry scars, seen and unseen, that never fully heal. Troy fell 3,000 years ago, if it existed at all, but the echo of its fall still resonates. The story has been told and retold countless times, in countless languages, because it speaks to something fundamental about human nature, about our capacity for both nobility and cruelty, about how easily we can be manipulated by our passions, about the terrible simplicity with which we can justify any action when we believe we are in the right. And somewhere, beneath all the layers of myth and legend, there might have been a real city, real people, real suffering. Whether the war happened as told or not matters less than what the story has become. A mirror held up to civilization itself, reflecting both our highest aspirations and our darkest failures. Chapter 12. The Wanderer's 10-year journey home. If the Iliad is the story of wars, glory, and horror, then the Odyssey is the story of war's aftermath. What becomes of those who survive? How they struggle to return to the lives they left behind, and whether home can ever truly be reached again after seeing and doing what war demands. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, had been reluctant to go to Troy in the first place. When the call to honor Helen's oath came, he had pretended to be mad, yoking an ox and a donkey together and plowing his fields with salt. But the messenger, suspecting trickery, placed Odysseus's infant son Telemachus in front of the plow. Odysseus, unable to maintain the pretense when his child's life was at stake, swerved aside. His sanity proven, he had no choice but to join the war. For 10 years, he fought at Troy. His cunning won countless victories. The Trojan horse, that masterstroke that finally ended the war, was his design. But when the war ended and the other Greeks sailed home, Odysseus found that the gods, specifically Poseidon, had other plans for him. The first stop seemed innocent enough. The island of the Lotus Eaters, where the inhabitants consumed a flower that made them forget everything: home, family, purpose. Some of Odysseus' men ate the lotus and had to be dragged back to the ships by force, weeping for their lost paradise of forgetting. Then came the encounter that would doom Odysseus 2 years of wandering. On Sicily, in a cave stocked with cheese and sheep, lived Polyphemus, one of the Cyclopes. a one-eyed giant, son of Poseidon. Odysseus and his men entered seeking hospitality, but the Cyclops sealed the cave's entrance with a boulder too large for them to move and began eating the men 2 at a time. Odysseus's cunning saved them. He got the Cyclops drunk on strong wine, then, when asked his name, replied, "Nobody. My name is Nobody." When Polyphemus fell into drunken sleep, Odysseus heated a massive stake in the fire and drove it into the giant's single eye, blinding him. Polyphemus's screams brought other Cyclopes running. "What's wrong?" they called. "Nobody is hurting me. Nobody is killing me," Polyphemus howled. The other Cyclopes, thinking him mad or cursed by the gods, left him alone. In the morning, Polyphemus opened the cave to let his sheep out to graze, feeling each one's back to ensure no man escaped. But Odysseus and his men clung to the undersides of the sheep, hanging on while the blind giant felt only wool above them. They escaped to their ships, but here Odysseus made a fatal error. Overcome with pride at his own cleverness, he couldn't resist shouting back his true name as they sailed away. "Remember this, Cyclops. It was Odysseus, king of Ithaca, who blinded you." Polyphemus, hearing this, prayed to his father Poseidon, "Make him suffer. Let him lose all his companions. Let him wander for years before reaching home, and when he arrives, let him find only trouble waiting." Poseidon heard his son's prayer, and Odysseus's wanderings truly began. They reached the island of Aeolus, keeper of the winds, who gave Odysseus a leather bag containing all the adverse winds. "Sail straight home," Aeolus advised. "Don't open this bag." For 9 days they sailed Ithaca, almost in sight. But while Odysseus slept, his curious crew opened the bag, thinking it contained treasure. All the winds escaped at once, driving them back across the sea, farther from home than ever. They landed at the island of the Lastrygonians, giant cannibals who destroyed all but one of Odysseus's 12 ships, eating the crews. Only Odysseus's ship escaped, fleeing while his companions' screams echoed behind them. Next came Ia, island of the witch goddess Circe. She transformed half of Odysseus's remaining men into pigs with her magic. But Hermes came to Odysseus's aid, giving him a magical herb called moly that protected him from Circe's spells. When her magic failed to affect him, Circe was impressed enough to restore his men. They stayed on her island for a year, and she told Odysseus something that chilled him. "To find your way home, you must first go to the underworld and consult the shade of the prophet Tiresias." Odysseus sailed to the very edge of the world, to the place where the living could commune with the dead. There, in that dim realm of shadows, he performed the proper rites and summoned the spirits. Tiresias came and prophesied about the remainder of his journey, warning him of dangers ahead. But other shades appeared too. Odysseus saw his mother, who had died grieving for him, not knowing if he lived or died at Troy. He saw Achilles, who told him, "I would rather be a living slave than king of all the dead." He saw the great heroes of old, and Ajax, who still refused to speak to him, nursing his grudge into eternity. Returning to the world of light, Odysseus sailed on past the Sirens, whose songs promised knowledge of all things, but whose island was ringed with the bones of sailors who had listened and died. Odysseus had his men plug their ears with wax, but he himself, curious, wanted to hear. So they lashed him to the mast, and though the Sirens' song drove him mad with longing, the ropes held, and they sailed safely past. Then came the strait between Scylla and Charybdis, a choice between two monsters. Scylla was a six-headed beast, living in a cliff cave, each head snatching a sailor as ships passed. Charybdis was a massive whirlpool that would swallow ship and crew entirely. Odysseus chose to risk Scylla, reasoning that losing 6 men was better than losing everyone. Those 6 screamed his name as Scylla devoured them, and their cries would haunt him forever. They reached Thrinacia Island of the sun god Helios's sacred cattle. Odysseus warned his men, "Do not touch these cattle, no matter how hungry we become." But the winds trapped them on the island for weeks. Their food ran out. While Odysseus prayed to the gods, his men slaughtered some of the cattle. Helios demanded vengeance. Zeus struck their ship with lightning as soon as they sailed. The ship shattered. Every man drowned. Only Odysseus survived, clinging to wreckage, drifting for 9 days, until washing up on Ogygia Island of the nymph Calypso. Calypso was beautiful, immortal, and lonely. She fell in love with Odysseus and kept him on her island for 7 years. The Phaeacians, a peaceful people beloved by the gods, listened to his tale of all his wanderings. Moved by his suffering, they gave him a ship and crew, and this time, finally, he reached Ithaca 20 years after he had left. 10 years at war, 10 years wandering. He had left as a young king with a wife and infant son. He returned as a weathered man, alone, to find his kingdom in chaos. He saw the suitors' arrogance, their abuse of his servants, their disrespect toward his son. He saw Penelope, still beautiful, still waiting, though she no longer truly believed he would return. He revealed himself only to Telemachus and a few loyal servants. Together they planned. Then the disguised Odysseus asked to try. The suitors mocked him, but Penelope allowed it. He strung the bow with ease, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He fired an arrow through all 12 axes, and then he turned the bow on the suitors. "You dogs," he said, shedding his disguise. "You thought I would never return. You violated my home, threatened my son, pressed my wife. Now you will pay." What followed was slaughter. Odysseus and Telemachus, aided by loyal servants, killed every single suitor. The halls ran red with blood. Some begged for mercy. None received it. The battle was swift and brutal and merciless. Finally, after 20 years, after trials that would have broken any other man, after wandering half the known world and visiting even the realm of the dead, Odysseus was home. Penelope, still not quite believing, tested him. She mentioned moving their marriage bed, knowing Odysseus had built it himself around a living olive tree, making it immovable. "The bed cannot be moved," he said. "I built it myself, and no one else would know that detail." Only then did she believe. Only then did they embrace, reunited after 2 decades of waiting. The Odyssey teaches us that the journey home is often harder than the journey out, that war changes those who fight it, making them strangers even to themselves. That cleverness matters as much as strength. That persistence defeats even divine opposition. That home is not just a place, but the people who remember us and the life we left behind. Odysseus is the archetype of the wanderer, the exile, the person trying desperately to return to a life that may no longer exist. His struggles resonate because we all, in some way, know what it is to feel lost, to long for home, to wonder if we can ever truly return to who we were before life changed us. And in Penelope, we see the other side, faithful waiting, hope maintained against all evidence, the refusal to believe a loved one is truly gone. She is as heroic as Odysseus, in her way, enduring her own trials, while the world told her to give up, to move on, to accept that her husband was dead. Together, they remind us that some bonds cannot be broken by time or distance, that love can endure even decades of separation, that home, true home, is worth any journey, any trial, any sacrifice to reach again. Chapter 13. Why these tales endure. I have been telling stories for longer than any mortal lifetime. Yet these tales, these ancient Greek myths, hold a special place even for one as old as I. There is something about them that transcends their age, that speaks across millennia as clearly as if they were told yesterday. Perhaps it is their humanity. The Greek gods, for all their power, were magnificently flawed. Zeus could not control his appetites. Hera burned with jealousy. Ares lusted for violence. Aphrodite played with hearts like toys. They loved and hated with the passion of mortals, magnified to cosmic scale. They were not distant, perfect beings to be worshipped from afar. They were family, dysfunctional, dramatic, dangerous family, and the Greeks understood that divinity did not mean perfection. The heroes, too, were flawed. Achilles' pride cost him his best friend. Odysseus' cleverness sometimes crossed into cruelty. Heracles' strength could not save him from his own rage. Perseus succeeded through luck and divine aid as much as courage. Jason ended in disgrace despite his glorious quest. These were not sanitized, perfect champions, but complex characters whose virtues and vices both shaped their destinies. The myths served many purposes. They explained natural phenomena, why we have seasons, where diseases came from, why fire exists. They provided moral instruction. Hubris always leads to downfall. Hospitality is sacred. Keeping one's word matters. They entertained, certainly, with their drama and adventure and larger-than-life characters. But more than all of this, they explored what it means to be human. What do we do when faced with impossible choices? How do we balance duty and desire? What is the price of ambition? Can we escape fate, or does trying to avoid it ensure it comes to pass? What do we owe to family, to community, to the gods, to ourselves? How do we find meaning in a world where death is inevitable and the gods play games with mortal lives? These questions remain as relevant now as they were when the myths were first told around ancient fires. We may not believe in Zeus hurling thunderbolts or Poseidon stirring storms, but we still struggle with pride and jealousy and the consequences of our choices. We still long for home when far away. We still must decide between what is right and what is easy. We still face trials that seem designed to break us. The myths have seeped into our very language. An Achilles' heel means a fatal weakness. A Herculean task is one requiring enormous effort. A Pandora's box is something that once opened releases troubles that cannot be contained. A Trojan horse is a gift that conceals danger. Narcissism comes from the boy who fell in love with his own reflection. The Oedipus complex references a king who unknowingly killed his father and married his mother. These stories live in how we speak, often without us even realizing their origin. Western art and literature have returned to these myths again and again. Every generation retells them, finding new meanings, new relevance. Painters have depicted these scenes for centuries. Poets have versified them. Playwrights have dramatized them. Novelists have reimagined them. They are endlessly adaptable, endlessly relevant, because, at their core, they deal with experiences and emotions that do not change even as civilizations rise and fall. Science has borrowed their names too. The planets bear names of Roman gods who are really just the Greek gods with different names. NASA's space program was called Apollo. Medical terms reference mythological figures. Psychology draws on their stories to explain human behavior. Even in our most modern technological endeavors, we reach back to these ancient tales for meaning and inspiration. But perhaps what makes these myths truly timeless is their honesty. They do not promise that virtue will always triumph, or that heroes will always win. Good people suffer. The innocent are punished. The guilty sometimes prosper. Love does not always conquer all. Hard work does not guarantee success. The gods are not fair. This tragic worldview, where fate is real and often cruel, where even heroes must die, where the universe does not care about our desires or deserve, might seem depressing, but there is profound courage in it too. If the ending is not guaranteed to be happy, then the choices we make along the way matter even more. If we will all die regardless, then how we live becomes the only thing that truly matters. If the gods will not save us, then we must save ourselves, or at least die trying with honor. The myths teach us to face impossible odds with courage, to keep our promises even when breaking them would be easier, to show hospitality to strangers, to honor our parents while forging our own paths, to use our intelligence when strength fails, to endure suffering with dignity, to love fiercely even knowing love can bring the deepest pain, to keep going even when hope seems lost. They also warn us against excessive pride, against thinking ourselves above divine law or natural order. Hubris, that overweening arrogance, is the fatal flaw that brings down kings and heroes alike. Arachne challenged Athena to a weaving contest and was transformed into a spider. Niobe boasted of her children and watched the gods kill them all. Icarus flew too high and plummeted to his death. The message is clear. Know your place. Respect the gods. Do not let success make you forget your mortality. Yet these same myths celebrate those who dare greatly. Heroes who face monsters. Lovers who defy convention. Tricksters who outwit the powerful. There is a tension here between accepting limits and pushing beyond them, between respecting order and embracing chaos. This tension is never fully resolved, and perhaps that is why the myths remain compelling. They acknowledge the complexity of human experience rather than reducing it to simple lessons. The Greeks understood something profound about storytelling, that the best tales are not those with clear morals and happy endings, but those that reflect life's actual complexity, that sometimes the villain has a point, that sometimes the hero makes terrible mistakes, that sometimes love is not enough, that courage fails, that the innocent suffer, while the guilty prosper. But they also understood that even in a universe that can seem arbitrary and cruel, there is meaning to be found in how we face our trials. That glory earned through struggle is sweeter than anything simply given. That the bonds we forge, friendship, love, family, loyalty, are worth fighting for, even when reason says we cannot win. That creating something beautiful, achieving something remarkable, protecting someone vulnerable, or simply enduring with grace in the face of suffering, these things matter, even if they do not change our ultimate fate. I have watched countless civilizations rise and fall, have seen empires that seemed eternal crumble into dust, have witnessed the birth and death of languages, religions, entire ways of life. But these Greek myths persist. They adapt, they evolve, they take on new forms and meanings, but they endure. They endure because they speak to something fundamental in human nature. Because 3,000 years ago, people loved and feared and hoped and dreamed in ways we still recognize. Because the questions they asked are questions we still ask. Because their heroes' struggles resonate with our own struggles. Scaled to mythic proportions, but arising from the same impulses, the same desires, the same fears that we carry within us. When you hear these tales, you are connecting with an unbroken chain of storytelling that stretches back to the Bronze Age. Fathers told them 2 sons, mothers 2 daughters. Bards sang them in firelit halls. Priests recited them in temples. Playwrights adapted them for stages. Poets immortalized them in verse. Scholars preserved them in manuscripts. And now, across millennia, they come to you. They come to remind you that others have faced impossible challenges and endured. That love and loss are universal experiences. That courage is not the absence of fear, but action despite it. That cleverness can triumph over strength. That our choices matter. That stories properly told, deeply felt, passed down through generations, can make us immortal in a way that even the gods might envy. For what are the gods now? Gone or changed beyond recognition. Their temples, ruins, their worship ended, but their stories, those remain. Achilles and Odysseus, Heracles and Perseus, Medea and Penelope, they live on in ways the gods themselves do not. Perhaps the ultimate victory is not in divine power, but in being remembered, in having your story told again and again, in inspiring others, in becoming part of the great conversation that humanity has with itself across the ages. These myths remind us that we are part of something larger than ourselves, a continuity of human experience that connects us to ancestors we never knew and descendants we will never meet. When you recognize a reference to Pandora's box or the Trojan horse, when you understand why someone's heel might be their weakness, or why a task might be called Herculean, you are participating in a cultural inheritance that has shaped Western civilization for 3 millennia. But more than that, you are connecting with the fundamental questions that make us human. How should we live? What do we owe to others? What gives life meaning? How do we face death? What is the right balance between accepting our limitations and striving to transcend them? The Greeks asked these questions through their myths, and we are still seeking the answers. In the end, perhaps that is why these stories are among the best ever told, not because they provide neat answers, but because they ask the right questions, not because they show us perfect heroes to emulate, but because they show us flawed characters who struggle as we struggle. not because they promise happy endings, but because they show us that meaning can be found even in tragedy, that beauty can emerge from suffering, that a life fully lived, with all its pain and joy, triumph and failure, love and loss, is worth the living. The Greeks gave us these gifts, stories that entertain and instruct, characters who feel real despite their impossible circumstances, insights into human nature that remain true across centuries, and a reminder that we are all heroes of our own stories, facing our own monsters, seeking our own golden fleece, trying to find our way home. And thus ends another memory from ages long past. If you have found a spark of wonder here, stay a while longer, for there are countless tales yet to be remembered. The fire burns low now, dear listener, and the night grows deep. But before you go, know that these stories, these myths of gods and heroes, of love and war, of triumph and tragedy, are yours now to carry forward. Tell them to others. Find in them what speaks to your own life, your own struggles, your own hopes. For in the end, we are all wanderers seeking home, all heroes facing impossible odds, all mortals trying to make meaning in a vast and often indifferent universe. The Greeks understood this, their myths speak to it, and so these tales, born in a distant age when the world was young, remain as vital and necessary today as they were when first told beneath the stars. May you find in them what you need: courage for your trials, wisdom for your choices, hope for your journey, and the knowledge that you are not alone. Others have walked this path before, others will walk it after, and the stories we tell, these ancient, enduring, ever-new stories, light the way for all of us. Rest well, my dear listener, and when you wake, remember, you too are part of the great story, and how you live your chapter matters more than you know. The end.